What's up, everybody? Many people have asked me about how I go about cleaning my fishing reel and how often I do it. I rinse out my fishing reel after every surf fishing trip. Salt water is very corrosive, so you want to make sure you rinse out your reel once you get home. When I fish freshwater, I don't do that. I just put my reels away without rinsing. When you're rinsing out your reel, just use a light spray. Don't use a high jet where it can push sand or debris into the body. Okay, so here's the reel. So I'm going to take it apart and clean it and put some oil and grease on it. And before I do this, I usually let the reel dry for about 24 hours before I take it apart. I'm going to remove this cap first. Now I'm going to remove the handle and I'm going to unscrew it backwards, counterclockwise. You want to inspect the handle collar and make sure there's no sand in there. It helps if you get a Q-tip and try to get it out. Same with here. Next thing, I'm going to remove the spool. And you want to inspect the inside, make sure there's no sand in there as well. If there is, get some Q-tip and take it out. Remove the cap and make sure there's no sand in there. So that looks clean. I just greased it last time I cleaned it. So now you have the rotor. Inspect the rotor, get out any sand that might get caught in there. At this point, I just inspect the bail and make sure there's no sand inside these little grooves. Now, if there are sand in these joints, you're going to feel it. It's going to be, when you click it back, it's going to grind a little bit. So you want to take off that screw right there. But this one is pretty clean. It flips back pretty crisp, nice sound to it. But I am going to inspect inside here, so I'm going to take that off. So you can see right there's a little bit of sand, so I'm just going to take my Q-tip and try to get the sand off of there. As you can see, the grease in there, that's from my last cleaning, so it's still looking pretty good. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to put the plate back on. Before I do, I want to make sure there's no sand in here as well. So the cover goes back on. Okay, so now I'm going to get inside the body. There's 4 screws you got to remove. 1, 2, 3, and 4 here in the bottom. One last screw. Okay, so I got all my screws in this little cup. It's actually a lid for the power bait jar. Now I'm going to remove the cap here. And this is what you do. First, you just do a visual inspection and make sure there's no sand in there. And there should be grease in there all the time. If there isn't, I would definitely add grease. I wouldn't add oil. Grease is going to keep the water out better. So what I want to do now is I want to remove the center pin. And to do that, you have to remove this screw right there. So we're going to go ahead and remove that. Before we do that, this little bearing right here that comes off, there is a very, very thin washer right there, so don't lose that. Okay, so now we can pull out this center pin here, just like that. Okay, I'm going to take some tissue paper and wipe out that metal piece. Okay, now you can remove this sprocket and all the gears in there. For the sprocket, there's a little bearing right here too. Okay, so what I would do is just inspect it for any sand. And what you want to see is just grease. Grease is good. So if you want to apply new grease on, just wipe out the old grease and put the new ones on. More parts here. For the body, again, just visually inspect it. As you can see, there's a lot of blue grease. I tend to put a lot of grease in there because I don't want any water to get in. It helps keeps the water out, so that's why I just overload it. If there's any sand, just get a Q-tip and take it out. Okay, so there it is. So that's looking good. Now I'm going to remove that rotor, and the first thing that comes out is that little tiny screw right there. For that bolt right there, you need a size 11 millimeter socket. Okay, so now the rotor can be removed. Again, inspect inside the rotor. Any sand, other debris, take it out. So now we're going to remove those 3 screws. Okay, so you can remove the centerpiece right here. Right, just like that. Okay, now you can remove that. These pieces do come apart. Like that. Now you just want to inspect this visually. Wipe it clean. Okay, so right there. There's a very small washer right here. Try not to lose that. And you want to check inside there to make sure there's no sand. If there is, get it out. It looks pretty good. So that's all I do is I take everything apart and just inspect it to make sure there's no sand or other debris in it. If there is, take it out. So now I'm going to put it back together, and before I do that, I'm going to grease all these parts and add more grease into the body. Okay. So the first thing is kind of going backwards. Before I put it back together, this is the grease I use for greasing all the gears. It's pretty thick. It's very effective in keeping water out and preventing your gears from rusting. I like it a lot. Now I have used this. I bought these a long time ago. I've honestly never used them before. I just prefer the grease because it, like I said, it does a lot better job at keeping the water out. You can use oil if you want, but I find that the grease, it just stays in the body a lot longer. I want to put some grease on that pinion gear here. Now this clutch sleeve. Basically, this is the anti-reverse. Goes in right there. Now for this thing. Okay, there's that. Now we're going to put back this bearing retainer. When you put these 3 screws back together, don't tighten them, one at a time. Make sure all of it goes in first, and then you can start tightening them. So that's good right there. Now we can put on the rotor. Before you put on this rocking plate, make sure you tighten this nut as far as it will go, hand tighten. And then you can put on that locking nut. Like that. And then you get your 11 millimeter socket and just tighten it up until that hole lines up with the locking plate. And then you can put this screw back on. All right, there it is. The rotor is put back together. Okay. Now I'm going to work on the inside here. I'm going to start with that ball bearing that goes right there. This guy right here. There we go. Fits nice and snug. Now we're going to put back the crosswind gear. Just like that. Now this little crosswind block here, it's going to go right on top of here. But that little piece sticking out right there, it's going to go inside that little groove. When you put this in, that hole right there has to face that way because that's where the main shaft goes in. All right, at this point, I'm going to grease it up a little bit more. It doesn't matter if you don't get it on this side of the sprocket, because when you turn it, it'll move that grease around. Now we can put back the main gear. It's important here, this thing is going to move, so make sure you center it back in the position so that it can accept that main shaft, that hole right there. Okay, just like that. Okay, at this point, let's try to put the main shaft back in. All right, right there. So now we can put that screw back on and lock it. Okay, just like that. All right, so that's looking pretty good right there. Now it wouldn't hurt if you want to add more grease in here. Now you don't have to put it all over the gear here. You just put it on one side, and when the gears turn, it's going to carry that grease all over the reel, all over that sprocket, okay? Just like that. Okay, that's probably good enough right there. Okay, there it is. So let's go ahead and put the body plate back on. Okay, so I got the 3 screws here. Again, before you tighten them, I would tighten them a little bit at a time. Just go around, make sure all three screws are snug before you tighten them down. Okay, so the last thing is the bottom plate here. Now the rotor goes back on. Okay, so there it is. Now for the handle, just gonna dip it in there. Nice and tight. For this end, the cap, I'm just gonna put a little bit of grease in there too. Okay, there it is. So that's about it, guys. When I'm all done, I'm just gonna take a paper towel and wipe down the body. Get all the grease off the body. Like that. Okay, so that's about it, guys. That's how I clean my reel. This is something that I do only when it's necessary. If I drop it in the water and I get a lot of sand in there, I'm definitely going to take it apart and clean it. And this is the grease that I use. Now, if you want a link to get this grease, I'll put it in the video description. All right. That's about it, guys. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time. Have fun fishing. Tight lines.